Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember to subscribe. The incredible life and barbaric execution of Joan of Arc. Joan is the subject of one of the most important legacies, and when she was only a teenager, she saw the French army to victory in the siege of Orleans in 1429. Joan is the patron saint of France, and after her death she was then considered a martyr and was known as the Maid of Orleans. The 100-Year War was a conflict between England and France, and it started in 1337 over disputes of who the rightful heir to the French throne was. The English looked likely to win the war as they triumphed in many early battles, and even looked like they were to rule with a dual monarchy. Now, in the 14th century, France had been ravished by the Black Death and the population was dwindling, but Joan was born under the reign of the French king Charles VI, and he, unfortunately, suffered from moments of insanity, at times making him unable to rule. But in 1420, the Queen of France left the throne to Henry V and his sons, something that Henry had wanted following his victory at the Battle of Agincourt. She did this rather than leave the throne to her own son. In 1422, both the King of France and the King of England passed away, making Henry VI the King of both France and England. But Henry VI was just a young child at the time, so Henry's uncle, John of Lancaster, needed to act as regent. Now, Joan was born to Jacques d'Arc and Isabella Remy in the village of Dumery in north-east France. Joan's father was a farmer by trade, but also worked as a tax collector. Joan and her family lived in an area that was loyal to the French king, and this then led to raids occurring and later the burning of her village to the ground. Joan is thought to have been born in 1412 and is said to have had no formal education, meaning she could not read or write. Joan's later letters are therefore thought to have been scribed, as she then signed them with the help of others. Now, it's important to understand the impact of the Queen of France signing the Treaty of Troyes, the thing that granted the succession to the French throne to the English. The agreement revived the suspicions that the Dauphin was in fact the product of an affair with the late king's brother. Joan had, from about the age of 13, testified to having had visions where she saw Saint Michael, Saint Catherine and Saint Margaret, and they told her to drive out the English and take the Dauphin for his consecration. Joan claimed that she saw the saints in her father's garden, and when they left she cried, because they were just so beautiful. Now, when Joan was 16, she was taken to a village by a relative, and it was here that she asked to see a commander, to then ask him to escort her to the French court. But the commander did not help her. Instead, Joan had to return the following January, where she then had the support of 2 soldiers. Joan is quoted as saying, "I must be at the king's side. There will be no help for the kingdom if not from me. Although I would rather have remained spinning wool at my mother's side, I must go, and must I do this thing, for my Lord wills that I do so." Joan was then allowed a second meeting with the commander, where she predicted the military fortune at the Battle of Rouvray near Orleans. This was several days before word arrived by messenger. With Joan's predictions coming true, she was then looked upon as a divine figure. Joan was then taken to visit the royal court. She was disguised as a male soldier, and the escort travelled through hostile territory. Now, this was something that would later lead to Joan being charged with cross-dressing. Then, in 1429, Joan arrived at the court and privately spoke with Charles. Here Joan asked if she could accompany the French army and wear armour provided by the crown. Now, the crown saw this as a risk. They were suffering tremendously in the 100-Year War, but all previous attempts to lift them out of the depths of the war had failed. Joan also risked being looked upon as a heretic or a witch, and she unknowingly turned a war about rulers into a war about religion, due to her visions and claims of being visited by saints who told her to expel the English from France. So an inspection of Joan's morals and personality were ordered by Charles, to protect her and himself. Then, in the April of 1529, Joan was found to be of irreproachable life, a good Christian, and that she possessed the virtues of humility, honesty, and simplicity. This then allowed Charles to use Joan in a military capacity. His advisers said that to doubt or abandon her of suspicion of evil would go against the Holy Spirit and become unworthy of God's aid. So Joan was to be put to the test to see if she could lift the siege of Orleans as she had predicted. Joan then joined the army and was provided with armour by the royal government. She depended on donated items for her armour, such as a horse, sword, banner, and other items utilised by her entourage. Charles would have known that all other orthodox options had been tried and failed, because only a regime in the depths of desperation would pay any heed to an illiterate farm girl, who said that the voice of God had instructed her to take charge of her country's army and lead it to victory. But Joan's actual history of military participation and leadership is a subject of debate. She was excluded from some war council meetings and was not informed when the army engaged in the enemy. But this did not deter her, nor hinder Joan. She was present for most councils and battles. There are two versions of Joan's actions during battle. Firstly, it's said that Joan carried only a banner, and that she never killed anyone. She preferred her banner 40 times better than a sword, and that the army was directly commanded by noblemen. But on the other hand, it is said that Joan had a profound effect on the decisions of those same noblemen, since they mostly accepted that her advice was divinely inspired. But no matter which version is correct, one thing that is clear is that the army enjoyed remarkable success during the brief time that Joan was with them. Now Joan's first mission was to join a convoy that brought food to the town. During this, Joan had intended to face the English from the north, but her commander wanted to go south, thinking that it was too risky. Joan was not happy with this and ordered an immediate attack on the nearest English garrison. And it is here that it is said that one of Joan's miracles occurred. The wind that brought the boats upriver suddenly changed direction, thus allowing the convoy to sail back to Orleans quickly and with no issue. So then, on the 29th of April at 8 p.m, Joan entered the town victoriously, and over the next day or two she was paraded around the streets. She gave out food and is said to have paid the soldiers. Joan is also said to have sent letters to the English demanding their departure. Now, after Joan's arrival in Orleans, the luck of the French changed. They began to capture strategic locations and specific targets and areas. But Joan then unfortunately became injured. She was holding up a banner in a trench outside Les Tourelles, which was the main English stronghold. Joan was caught by an arrow between her neck and shoulder. But the injury did not stop her. She recovered quickly and later returned to encourage an assault that led to the successful taking of the fortress, an act that caused the English to retreat from Orleans, and thus the siege was over. Joan had achieved exactly what she had promised. The French then looked upon Joan as the heroine of engagement, but the English saw her abilities to defeat their army as proof that she was a witch or even possessed by the devil. The English were furious that God was supporting the French through Joan. Joan then had more military successes, and by mid-June the English had backed up further, with the French claiming more territory. And then in the July of 1429, Charles was, as instructed to do so by Joan, consecrated as king. He felt that Joan had helped with a huge turning point with his army, and France was now facing in a better direction. Joan attended the consecration. She stood close to the altar, holding her banner high. After the consecration of Charles, the army then faced many more victories. But on the 8th of September, in Paris, Joan was injured again, this time through a crossbow to her leg. Joan was carried back to safety, but the assault on Paris was unsuccessful. Then a short truce was agreed with the English, but this didn't last long. In the March of 1430, Joan wrote a letter to the Hussites, a dissident group that had broken with the Roman Catholic Church. In her letter she threatened to remove your madness and foul superstition, taking away either your heresy or your lives. Joan, an ardent Catholic, also hated all forms of heresy, and sent a letter challenging the English to leave France and go with her to Bohemia and fight the Hussites, an offer they did not respond to. After the truce with the English had ended, Joan travelled to Compiègne to help defend the city against the English and the Burgundians. But it was during an attempt to attack the Burgundian camp that she was ambushed and subsequently captured. Joan was at the rear of the guard when she was pulled from her horse by an archer. Joan agreed to surrender and was imprisoned at Beauvoir Castle, where she made several attempts to escape, even jumping out of her 70-foot tower and landing on the soft earth of the moat below. But after this she was moved to a different location, but the English, knowing her worth, negotiated with the Burgundians to have her transferred to their English custody. The cost of this transfer was 10,000 livres, and she was then moved to Rouen, the main headquarters of the English in France. There was several rescue attempts, but they were beaten back. Charles even threatened to exact revenge on those who captured her, and upon the English and the women of England in retaliation for their treatment of Joan. But nothing was successful. Joan was then tried for heresy, something that was politically motivated. The trial was overseen by English and Burgundian officials, and was to try and cause Joan maximum embarrassment. So in the February of 1431, the trial began and Joan was denied a legal adversary. England couldn't let Joan go free, because if she was guided by the words of God, then so was the French king. With the tribunal being solely made up of English clergy, it violated the medieval church's requirements that trials for heresy be judged impartially by a balanced group of clerics. Joan asked for a balance by bringing in eschatologists of the French side, but her request was denied. The list of charges against Joan was huge, but it included the wearing of men's clothing, heresy and witchcraft. Joan put up a fight, and her defence remained mature. She ran circles around the prosecutors. She stood up for herself, and when questioned about cross-dressing, she admitted to it but stated she did so to protect her modesty, as whilst she was in the French prison she was molested. Joan's trial was then turned into a private trial, and during the February and March she faced gruelling interrogations, but Joan managed to keep her humility and innocence. She was held in a military prison and constantly faced the threat of torture, but Joan did not give in or break. The tribunal, with no evidence of witchcraft or heresy, became frustrated, so they then decided to use her military clothes against her. And then, on the 29th of May 1431, Joan was announced to be guilty of heresy, and the next morning her punishment would be acted out. Joan was to be executed, and eyewitnesses described Joan's execution as her being burnt at the stake. She was understandably upset when she heard the news. and she even confessed to her jailers that she would rather lose her head. The guards who had previously laughed at her now took pity on her, and one even gave her a wooden cross moments before she was due to be tied to the stake. Joan then made her way into the marketplace towards a specially erected scaffold with a large stake centred. It is at this point that she kissed her cross. There was around 10,000 people there to watch her die, and after she was surrounded by the soldiers, she was tied to the stake. There were 3 galleries near the scaffold, one for the bishops, one for the judges, and one for the wood that would be used for the burning of the poor 19-year-old girl. At the end of the sermon that took place, the sentence was pronounced that delivered Joan to secular justice. Joan then began to make many pious exclamations. She stated that nothing she had done, good or ill, had been suggested by the king. The eyewitness then said they left, not wishing to see the burning of Joan, and that many bystanders were weeping. The wood was then lit, and Joan asked for 2 of the clergy to hold a crucifix before her. She stared at the symbols as the flames grew higher and began to engulf her. Joan prayed as the flames scorched her, and she said the name of Jesus Christ as the fire burnt her skin. I dread to think of the pain Joan endured in her last moments, a horrifying sight for anyone to witness. A 19-year-old girl engulfed by flames, a truly distressing scene. There is a legend that her heart survived the fire. The English are then said to have burnt her body twice more, an act that ensured she was reduced to nothing but ashes, and prevent any relics of Joan being collected. Joan's remains were then taken to and deposited off at a local river. Joan had been seen as a divine woman by the French, but the English could not believe that a woman could lead an army to victory unless she was in fact a witch or a heretic. She was seen by many as a holy woman, and many of those present at her execution, and even some of those at fault for her death, saw her as a holy woman, and felt they were to be eternally damned for burning her. Today Joan is remembered as the patron saint of France, and after a posthumous trial at the end of the 100 Years' War, she was deemed innocent. Joan's legacy needs to live on, as her role in history is certainly an important one, and she needs to be remembered. Her trial and execution were horrific, and she did not deserve the fate she was dealt, for she was only a child after all. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.